Alrighty. So hello. My name is Michelle McDonough. I am the Consumer Relations Specialist for Trillium Health's Harm Reduction Department. And today we are going to be talking about fentanyl. We'll learn what is it? How do we test for fentanyl? How do we encourage safer use if we find out that fentanyl is present? So just before we begin, like I said, my name's Michelle McDonough. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and I am from Trillium Health's Harm Reduction Services Department. We are located in Rochester, New York, and we are a syringe service program, among many other things. Um, Today we'll be figuring out what is fentanyl. There's a lot of different analogs of fentanyl. What are those? What are fentanyl test strips, and how do we use them? If anyone has any questions, feel free to just send me an email. It's right there, mmcdonough21@trilliumhealth.org. And hopefully this will be in the description of the video as well after the fact. So let's get started. What is fentanyl? Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid, so it's made entirely in a lab. It's not plant-based like heroin or morphine might be. It comes from poppy seeds. But fentanyl is completely synthetic. It's not the only synthetic opioid, but it is probably one of the most common. Fentanyl is used medically very often, and in regulated doses, it can be really therapeutic. It can be really beneficial. It's cheaper than heroin, per dose, which makes it easier to make money on than other drugs. People who use drugs and people who sell drugs are going to get the most bang for their buck when there's fentanyl involved. Fentanyl is cut into many street drugs, not just street drugs that are advertised as opioids, but really any drug that you might find on the street. And that is often without the knowledge of the person who's selling the drugs or the person who's buying the drugs. And fentanyl is generally regarded as being at least 50 times stronger than heroin, and that's depending on the analog. So what are analogs? First, we'll backtrack just a little bit. Fentanyl was created by Janssen in 1959 and approved by the FDA in 1968 as an anesthetic and painkiller. So an analog, or a chemical that looks very similar to another chemical, acts very similarly as well. Analogs of fentanyl were created to improve its use in the medical field. So some analogs are more potent. So carfentanil, that's 100 times stronger than your regular old fentanyl. And some analogs are less potent, like alfentanil, which is only a third as strong as your regular old fentanyl. This makes different kinds of fentanyl available to practitioners so they can use it for different reasons. So carfentanil was originally created for veterinary use, specifically among really large animals like horses. Alfentanil might be used for children or local or small dose anesthetic. So there's a lot of really great uses for fentanyl. Unfortunately, due to the nature of the drug supply and to the nature of drug use, all of these different analogs, many of them are found within your street supply of drugs. And different chemical structure on these fentalogs, on these analogs, can make them harder to detect on tests. So you've got your classic fentanyl down here at the bottom. That's its chemical structure. And you can see a bunch of different analogs along the sides there. Some of them look very similar. Some of them don't look so similar. And it's the chemical similarity that's going to let our fentanyl test strips do their job and either test positive or negative for fentanyl. So let's do some myth busting. Some things that I know I've heard about fentanyl. Some of you may have heard them as well. I'm going to go through and just kind of dispel some myths. So the first myth is that fentanyl is an instant death sentence. That is definitely not true. Like I said before, it can be used therapeutically. The last surgery I had, fentanyl was one of the drugs that they used on me, and I'm definitely still here. So it's not an instant death sentence. It's a lot stronger, and it can be cause a higher likelihood of overdose, but it's definitely not a death sentence. Speaking of overdose, our next myth is that Narcan does not work on fentanyl, and that's definitely a myth. Fentanyl is stronger than other opioids, so Narcan might not work as quickly, but it will work. Narcan is an opioid antagonist. All it's going to do is block those opioids in your body. Fentanyl's an opioid. Narcan works on fentanyl. Our next myth is that fentanyl is only mixed into heroin. That's not true. So fentanyl can be cut into almost anything, and it's very common to see it cut into crack or meth or benzos or any other really kind of drug, especially if that drug is in like a powder or pill form. Some more myths about fentanyl. The myth is that you can overdose from touching fentanyl, or you can overdose from breathing in a room where fentanyl is present. That is simply not true. Fentanyl cannot be absorbed through the skin, just as it is, and fentanyl does not float through the air. I read a study saying that if someone covered their whole hand in fentanyl patches, which are patches specifically designed to allow fentanyl to absorb through the skin, I covered my whole palm with fentanyl patches. It would take 14, 15 minutes for me to start feeling the effects and to perhaps experience an overdose. As a person with no opioid tolerance myself. So if someone just simply boop, touches fentanyl, there's not going to be an overdose. It's simply, fentanyl does not work that way. And our last myth is that fentanyl is being cut into cannabis, or you can overdose from smoking cannabis flower. The fact is, there are no confirmed cases of fentanyl purposefully being added to cannabis. Reactive fentanyl tests on cannabis are likely the result of the person selling the drugs not cleaning their equipment between customers. Fentanyl burns at a lower temperature than cannabis flower, so when cannabis flower is burned, the fentanyl is going to burn away and it's not going to be bioavailable. There are some rare instances where people say fentanyl could be activated while smoking cannabis. For example, if you're smoking a cannabis cigarette and the flame, the very hot part, is at the top and the hot smoke is traveling through the tube, the smoke can activate the fentanyl, can heat it up to the right temperature. That is possible. With that being said, it's highly unlikely, and there are no confirmed cases of fentanyl purposely being added to cannabis. Okay, so what are fentanyl test strips? Fentanyl test strips, or FTS, as I might refer to them throughout the PowerPoint, are enzyme immunoassays. They work really similarly to pregnancy tests. The strip, little piece of paper, is treated with a specific antibody, and that antibody changes color when it comes into contact with a target compound. In fentanyl test strips, that target compound is fentanyl and some fentanyl metabolites or analogs. For any immunoassay test, for any little strip test like this, there is a threshold for how little of a substance can be detected. So for the BTNX rapid response test strips, which are the ones I will be using today and the ones Monroe County sends out to all of our good friends in substance use in Monroe County. For the BTNX rapid response test strips, the threshold or minimum amount is between 20 and 200 nanograms per milliliter. And I put a little asterisk there because there have been some studies done showing that these test strips don't react in that amount for some different metabolites or analogs. This orange bubble over here in the corner is just something important we want to think about. Fentanyl test strips were originally created for testing urine. So they are not for just dipping in a bag of powder and seeing if the powder is made of fentanyl. They are for testing diluted amounts of drugs in a liquid. So a drug that has been broken down and mixed in with a liquid. So urine is definitely one of those liquids. That's their intention to be used with. However, a lot of harm reduction agencies have been using fentanyl test strips to test drugs mixed in water. And we've found both through like field use and also through studies that the fentanyl test strips work pretty much just fine for testing drugs mixed in water. But it's important to consider the dilution, like how much water per drug ratio we're working with, because that can really heavily impact the accuracy of the test. So what do test strips tell us? Test strips tell us if there are certain fentanyl analogs within the mixture that is being tested. They don't tell us how much fentanyl is in the mixture or how strong the fentanyl is. Test strips don't tell us which analog is in the mixture, and test strips don't tell us if a drug is safe or unsafe. Okay, so let's talk about accuracy. I just talked about dilution. Dilution is super duper important. So test strips can only test what you use them on. This is called the chocolate chip cookie effect. So if we look at this little orange box up in our top left corner, we'll see an example of the chocolate chip cookie effect. This cookie here, I take a bite out of it, I don't get any chocolate chips, but it's still a chocolate chip cookie. This example is shown pretty well in the little pill. So if I only test a little bit of this pill, there might not be an even distribution of fentanyl within the pill. It might not be mixed up totally. So if I only test a little bit of the pill, I might not be testing any of the fentanyl that's in the pill. And we might say like, oh, this tests negative for fentanyl, when in reality, there is fentanyl in the pill. So just something to look out for. It's why we recommend you test any drug you intend to consume. Next up, talking about dilution, not all analogs are created equal. There's a table on the next slide that I'll show you in just a moment. Some drugs may cause false positive results, and I have an example of that as well coming up. Because fentanyl test strips are made to test urine, the proper drug to water ratio is essential. So the main thing I want to touch on here is that meth and MDMA, or amphetamines in general, it's important to use a higher dilution, or 1 teaspoon of water per 10 milligrams of powder, because higher doses of the drug in the dilution can cause a false positive. And that's just due to the chemical nature of amphetamines. For all other drugs, what we want to do is test 1 teaspoon of water per 50 milligrams of powder. So when we talk about 1 teaspoon, that's about 5 milliliters. So if we look here, this is one of the little waters that we include in every test strip kit. See that right there. Each of these waters is 5 milliliters exactly. So it's pretty easy to measure. It's got little notches on the side, so you can measure 1 to 5 milliliters. And we will do a demo in a little bit. So on the next slide, it's a very busy table, I know, but if we would just look at the yellow highlights here, we can see that our BTNX rapid response kits test strips did not test positive for fentanyl with certain analogs. So 15 analogs at 100 nanograms per milliliter tested negative for fentanyl. 5 analogs at 1,000 nanograms per milliliter tested negative for fentanyl. And 3 analogs at 10,000 nanograms per milliliter tested negative for fentanyl. And some of these tests also came back as weak or ambiguous. We're not quite sure. The test might be hard to read. So just really important to consider, not all fentalogs analogs are created equal. And here's a little chart just showing how some drugs can cause a false positive. So we have diphenhydramine, Benadryl. It's a common cut in heroin. At high doses, it can cause a false positive fentanyl test. Lidocaine, also a common cut in heroin or other opioids. At high doses, like 100 milligrams per milliliter, 150 milligrams per milliliter, we can see a false positive. And again, methamphetamine, MDMA, once we get into that higher dose, so we can see false positives. So important things to think about, consider. I'm not saying that you should doubt your fentanyl test strips. If something does come back positive, it's always important to proceed with caution. But just some things we want to consider and emphasize how important dilution is. Okay, so testing your drugs. How do we test our drugs? First things first, we want to prepare our drugs for testing. So if we are testing pills, we want to grind the whole pill into a fine powder. We want to add about 1 tablespoon of water to the powder and stir until it's fully dissolved. Of course, this 1 tablespoon is going to depend on the type of pill that you're testing. It's going to test on the size of pill that you're testing. So if I'm testing like an itty bitty little pill, we might not want to do the 12 to 15 milliliters. A larger pill, you're definitely probably going to want to do that 12 to 15 milliliters. If we are testing MDMA, like an ecstasy pill, we might want to measure out the milligrams of the pill and work with our 10 milligrams per 1 tablespoon dilution rate that we talked about before. So there's a lot of things to consider. It might not be easy to teach folks about this. There are some really great resources online that are simple, easy to read, lots of pictures. At the end of the day, any test is better than no test. If it's not perfect, obviously we're not doing this in a lab. If it's not perfect and you test positive for fentanyl, then we're going to proceed with caution. So if we're preparing injectable drugs, if we're gonna shoot our drugs, we want to prep your shot like normal, making sure all the drugs you plan to use are fully dissolved. Then we're gonna draw up the shot and set it aside. Then we'll add 1 milliliter of water to the residue or the cottons in the cooker, and that is what we will test when we're testing injectable drugs. Important thing to think about with injectables is that a lot of folks use absorbic acid to break down crack or other stimulants when they're shooting them. Absorbic acid can cause fentanyl test strips to act a little funny. So we see these test strips down underneath my injectables box. These test strips were tested with just absorbic acid. And you can see our control line is getting a little fuzzy. Other brands of test strips, not the BTNX test strips, can test false positive with enough absorbic acid. So this is another reason why we really want to encourage folks to use only the smallest amount of absorbic acid that they need to break down their drugs and nothing more. So if we're testing like blotter or gel LSD, all of the resources that I found online says that we should cut off a small corner of the tab, soak it in 5 milliliters of water for 10 minutes. With my understanding of LSD and my understanding of how blotter works, so it's a drug spread out and absorbed into a sheet of paper, and that paper is then cut up into small doses. There is no guarantee that your dose is going to be the same from one square to another. So testing the whole tab, I would say, is advisable, but I could not find any information supporting this online. Fun fact, fentanyl test strips do not ruin your drugs like some other testing mechanisms do. You can still use them after you test them. You can either drink the mixture, or if someone likes to sniff their drugs and wants to sniff their drugs after they have been tested, you can evaporate the liquid to use the drugs as a powder. And that can be done like in a toaster oven, in an oven, some other options, but that might be a different presentation. Okay, so we've prepared our drugs. Next, how do we use them? How do we use the test strips? This infographic is from dancesafe.org. They are a great resource for anything that has to do with drug testing. I highly recommend everyone check them out. They have a lot of great resources and things available for purchase. So we were definitely going to need our drugs. We're going to need a bottle cap. So we've got a plastic bottle cap there from like a soda can. Our test strips, we give folks just an aluminum cap like we might at this syringe exchange. Of course, we're going to need our fentanyl test strips, and if available, a 10 milligram microscoop is going to be a really great resource. Dance Safe sells these microscopes, but if you don't have one, you can use your friend Abraham Lincoln, and we can see off to the side that if we cover his face with powder, that's about 10 milligrams. Like I said, it's not going to be perfect, but all we can do is the best we can do. So like to give folks a lot of different resources and how they can try to test in the most accurate way possible. So before we start diluting our drugs, we want to make sure that they are crushed up into a fine powder. We want the texture to be even. If there's a lot of solid rocks or chunks in our drugs, then we're going to be less likely to dissolve them all the way. We might experience that chocolate chip cookie effect, and we might not test positive for fentanyl when there actually would be fentanyl present. Next, we'll measure and dilute. So if we're using a micro scoop, you want it to be a flat scoop. You don't want it to be rounded. If you're using our good friend Abraham Lincoln on our 1 cent penny, then it just covers his face. I see some say that it covers his face, some you want to cover his hair. Basically, it's just a little bit. For meth or MDMA, we want to use 1 scoop or 10 milligrams. And for all other drugs, we want to use 5 scoops or 50 milligrams. The best practice is to test all of your drugs every single time. If that is not possible, then try to test a large amount of your drugs every single time. It's important to use that full 5 milliliters. A lesser dilution might give you like a false negative result. This infographic here says like fill the cap up all the way to the top. We don't want it halfway full. That's a great way to measure water if you don't have one of these neat little guys that contains exactly 5 milliliters. So just your average bottle cap is about 5 milliliters. And once we've got it all tested, once we've got it all diluted, then we'll test it. So we want to make sure that it's stirred, it's evenly distributed. Important note, you don't want to use your syringe to stir and mix up your drugs because it can harm the needle and therefore cause more harm to the skin and veins. So if you have a toothpick or something like that to mix up the drugs, go for it. If not, you maybe stir it around a little bit. Once we've got it stirred and fully dissolved as much as possible, then we will use our fentanyl test strip. So it's going to be, we're just going to dip the test strip into the water, into the solution, not above the blue line. Going to hold it for 15 seconds and then place it on a flat flat surface. You don't want to place it on like a paper towel or something because the paper towel could absorb the liquid and our test's not going to come out accurate. So like a flat, non-absorbent surface. After 3 minutes, we'll test, we'll look at our test, see what the results are. If the tests come back with 1 line, that means that there is fentanyl present. If the test comes back with 2 lines, that means there is no fentanyl present, which is a little bit different than some of the other immunoassays we might be used to, like a pregnancy test that's 2 lines is positive, a COVID test 2 lines is positive. When we're talking fentanyl test strips, 1 line is reactive or positive for fentanyl. Important thing to consider, the line can be very faint. That second line that shows up for no fentanyl present, it can be very faint. So try to use a bright light, squint your eyes a little bit because it may be very hard to detect. All right, and like I said, reading and responding to these results. Here's a really great infographic of like all the different parts of the test. Yeah, so we don't want to insert the water up, we don't want to insert it into the water above the blue line. Want to make sure that we are checking and looking very closely for the lower red line and see if we're positive or negative. Okay, so now I will do a quick demonstration. We will talk about, we will test a pill, some baggy residue, and also an injectable. So we'll test our shot. So let's see here. We'll switch to my other camera. Awesome. Okay. The resolution is not great, but that's fine. We will make it work. Okay. So let's see here. All right, we're going to test a pill first. So see this right here. I've got my little itty bitty pill. I ground it up before our presentation, so just for time's sake, but here it is. I'm going to test my whole pill, not just a part of it, because I intend to consume the whole pill. So that is best practice right there. If I only wanted to take half a pill, for example, then I would just test half a pill. If my pill was really big, then I would test the whole pill. If I'm testing a capsule or something, I could break open the capsule and mix that and test it that way. But for this is a pressed pill, so we will be testing it just nice and ground up. Okay. I've got that in my cooker. Now I'm going to mix it with water. I'm going to put the whole 5 milliliters in here. And I don't have a toothpick with me, so I'm going to use this to stir it up. Okay, looking good. Perfect. So, my resolution's a little shaky, but if you were here with me, you could see that there are some pieces of the pill coating still kind of floating in the liquid, and that's normal. You're not going to be able to dissolve the entire pill because a lot of pills have like fillers and different coatings and buffers and blah, blah, blah. So try to get it as diluted as possible, but if you can't dissolve all of the little bits and pieces of the pill, that's okay. Do the best you can. So we are going to test for fentanyl. So I've got my test strip. Rip open the package like that. We'll look inside. And we will pull it out. You only want to touch your test strip on this blue part here. You don't want to touch it along the white part. This white part is what does the testing for you. This is your safe place to grab. So we're going to dip this in our solution, making sure that the water does not touch above that blue line. If it touches above the blue line, we may risk a false positive, false negative. The test might not work properly. So we'll hold that in there for about 15 seconds. Alrighty. And then I'm going to place this down on my table and wait for the result to show up. So while we're waiting for that result, let's test some baggy residue. So here I've got a little baggie I put in my cooker. Found this outside, super cool. Something important we really want to think about and consider when we're testing baggy residue is the chocolate chip cookie effect again. If I take some cookies in my lunch and I bring them to work. I eat all the cookies. That Ziploc bag, all it's going to have in it is crumbs. Likely is not going to have any chocolate chips. Same thing for when we're testing for fentanyl. This bag did have drugs in it at one point. I can see that it's got a little bit of residue in there. I can't guarantee that the residue will test positive for fentanyl, even if there was fentanyl in the drugs that were in this baggie at one point. So it's also not a very high dilution. Or not the right dilution. We are testing what we can. We're using harm reduction and doing the best we can with what we've got. But testing baggy residue is not recommended. If it's the only way you can test your drugs, then so be it. But I would highly recommend testing all of your drugs every single time. So we've got our baggie here. I'm actually going to get my test strip out beforehand, so I'm not fumbling. Perfect. Okay. So I can only fill up this baggie so much, so I'm going to squirt some water in there. Till it's nice and full. I am going to swish the liquid around so it gets nice and mixed up. I overfilled this a little bit, but if possible, you could close the bag, swish it around. We want to get any drug residue that was on the bag mixed into the water. All right, so I've got it pretty nice and mixed there. I'm going to grab the blue side of my fentanyl test strip and stick it in the baggie. Again, we want to make sure we don't put the water line above that blue line, and we're going to wait 15 seconds. Okay, so that was our baggy residue. I'm going to put that safely on the table right there and mark it by putting it right next to the cooker that it belongs to. Okay, so we're waiting for those two. If we look, we can already see that this pill we tested is negative for fentanyl. We've got 2 lines there, if we can see it. Awesome. Sometimes it doesn't take the full 3 minutes. Sometimes it's just right away it shows up negative or positive. So now we know that my heartburn pill that I brought from home is negative for fentanyl. That's good to know. Okay, so the last thing we're going to do is we're going to test our shot. So, got my cooker. It's just table salt. Mix up a little bit of our drug. There you go. I'm going to use some of this water I used before. And I'm going to mix up the liquid. Bit more water. Diluting, diluting. Okay, looking good. So, what we'll do with that is I will take some cottons. I'm going to put them in there so they can absorb the liquid. Awesome. I've got my syringe. I am going to draw up my shot. There we go. Looking good. I am going to place this aside for now. Put that cap back on so it's safe on my table. And you can see all we've got left in here is our cottons. The cottons are still wet, but there's no just like free liquid floating around in there. So what I'm gonna do is I will use this to measure. So I'm gonna squirt out from here down to here and do 1 milliliter of liquid back onto my cottons, into that residue. Okay, that looks good. Gonna swish it around a little bit, make sure that it is properly diluted. Okay. So now that I've got that diluted properly, we will get our test strip. Pull it out, touching only the blue side, and test our drugs. So I'll put it down here. Again, making sure that we are not touching above that blue test line, and we'll hold for 15 seconds. Okay. That's good. I will place it down here on our table and put that cooker next to it so we know which one's which. So we can see now our baggy residue has also tested negative for fentanyl. There's a better way to see that. You can see it's very faint, but we do see that second line. Awesome. And our shot has already drawn up the water, that capillary action, gorgeous. And I can see it. I'm not sure if my camera can see it, but we are testing negative for fentanyl on that one as well, which is great because all I was testing was sugar, and I'd be really concerned if there was fentanyl in it. Okay, so that's our quick little demo. Your results may vary. I highly recommend finding some good literature to distribute to anyone who you are also distributing fentanyl test strips to. So hopefully they can educate themselves to the best of their ability and determine which method is going to be the best for them. Okay, and I do have a few more slides. I will just change my cameras around real quick and we will get right back to learning. Awesome. Okay. Let me just share my slides once more. Cool. So we're back where we left off. Now we have tested a couple different things for fentanyl. We found that they are all negative or non-reactive for fentanyl. I say non-reactive because, like we talked about before, there are possibilities for a false positive or a false negative. So if something's not reactive, it doesn't mean that there's no fentanyl for sure. It just means that there's a pretty high likelihood that there's no fentanyl, or vice versa. So moving on. What do we do if the drug tests positive for fentanyl? There are lots and lots of different options. So the first option is to get rid of the drugs, buy new ones. Studies on test strip use in different settings have found that people who use syringe service programs are much less likely to discard of their drugs. People who use overdose prevention centers or safe injection facilities are much less likely to dispose of their drugs when they find out that they are positive for fentanyl. People who encounter fentanyl test strips at things like festivals or parties or concerts are more likely to dispose of their drugs. So I bring this up because something we might hear a lot is like, oh, well, if it tests positive, then why are you still using it? It's fentanyl. We don't want to use fentanyl. And the truth is that not a lot of folks have the option or the opportunity to buy new drugs or find and buy drugs that don't have fentanyl in them. There's a very high likelihood of any street drug having fentanyl in it or having come in contact with fentanyl. So discarding drugs and buying new ones isn't always a feasible option, but it is an option. A more feasible option would be using a smaller dose. So doing a test shot, taking half your shot. Only want to do like a little bit of drug at a time to see how our body might react to it. This could mean taking half a pill and waiting for 30 minutes, an hour, whatever, seeing how that impacts you. And then if you're feeling up to it, you can take the other half or a quarter, whatever. So it's about knowing your body. It's about understanding like how you feel and how you intend to feel. So smaller doses can hopefully bump you up to how you intend to feel or how you hope to feel from using drugs, and will lessen your risk for overdose. Changing your method of use can also lower your risk for overdose. So injecting drugs has the highest risk for overdosing. If we can encourage folks to sniff their drugs or smoke their drugs or maybe boof them, or there are lots of different options for using drugs that aren't injection. If we can promote injection alternatives to the people that we work with, they will be less likely overall to experience an overdose, but also less likely to experience an overdose with fentanyl. It's kind of the same concept, like using a little bit at a time. If I am injecting drugs, whatever I inject in, it's in my body. If I am smoking drugs or sniffing drugs, I can take little hits one at a time and see how I feel after each one, and determine if I want to continue after each hit. A great resource is using with a buddy. So never use alone is something that we always like to say. Never use alone is a program. It's a hotline that folks can call if they do have to use alone. Highly recommend looking it up, neverusealone.com or .org. I always forget. But anyway, always use with a buddy. That way, if something does happen, there's somebody there who can help you out in an emergency situation. And of course, we always want to carry Narcan. You can get Narcan completely for free at Trillium Health Harm Reduction Services, 39 Delavan Street, Rochester, New York. There are tons and tons of other places where you can find free Narcan or naloxone. You can look up OOPP, Opioid Overdose Prevention Program, and then your area, and you can find different OOPPs in your area that can give you Narcan for free. Narcan can also be purchased at a pharmacy, and depending on where you live, there are some programs that can help lower the cost as well. All right. Here are some of the sources that I used. I can send these out after the fact. And this was intended to be live, but unfortunately is not. So I will just say again, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I can go back to the beginning and we can look at my email again. Awesome. So it's mmcdonough21@trilliumhealth.org. You can see it right there at the bottom. I'd love to answer any questions, talk about it, whatever. I wouldn't consider myself an expert, but I do think that I know quite a lot. And any question that you have that I don't know the answer to is another opportunity for all of us to learn. So yeah, that's that. Thank you so much for attending my little training. I hope you learned something, and I hope this can benefit not just you, but your peers, your clients, anyone who might come in contact with fentanyl. All right, so thank you so much. Have a great day.